The hover train glided silently above the autumn forests, its panoramic windows reflecting golden leaves and the distant glow of orbital traffic crossing the evening sky. Every year, Thanksgiving looked a little different since humanity had welcomed dozens of alien civilizations into its alliance. Traditional turkey still sat proudly on most tables, but now it shared space with glowing crystal fruits from Vega Prime, spiral bread from the Lorien colonies, and sweet blue nectar imported from the oceans of Arctis 9. Emma watched the landscape roll past as she adjusted the simple cream-colored dress she had chosen for dinner. She could have worn something far more expensive. Her closet was filled with designer outfits sent by luxury brands hoping she'd endorse them. Instead, she preferred clothes that made her comfortable. Her communicator vibrated. Kale, almost there. Dad insists on arriving exactly 6 minutes late. Apparently billionaires think punctuality is more dramatic that way. Emma laughed quietly, earning curious looks from nearby passengers. She typed back, "Please tell your father not to make a grand entrance." The reply came almost instantly. "I already tried. He called it excellent marketing." Emma shook her head. Even after 2 years together, Kale's family still found ways to surprise her. She slipped the communicator into her purse as the train reached the suburban district where her parents lived. Tonight was going to be interesting. She wasn't worried about meeting Kale's father. She was worried about introducing him to her own family. Her parents had always measured success by appearances. Expensive houses. Luxury speeders. Designer clothes. Exclusive social circles. If someone earned respect through kindness instead of wealth, they usually ignored it. Emma had learned years ago that arguing with them accomplished nothing. So she simply smiled, worked hard, and built a life they knew almost nothing about. Her career technically began as a waitress. She genuinely loved the work. Meeting new people, remembering regular customers, solving problems before anyone noticed them, making tired travelers leave smiling. She believed hospitality wasn't about carrying plates. It was about making strangers feel like honored guests. That simple philosophy had quietly opened doors she never imagined. But her parents never asked about any of it. To them, she was still the waitress. The front gate recognized her arrival and opened automatically. The family home was overflowing with luxury vehicles, including several sleek alien transports floating silently above the driveway. Emma blinked. "That's more guests than usual." Before she even reached the front door, it burst open. Her mother hurried outside wearing an extravagant dress covered with shimmering alien gemstones. "There you are!" Karen exclaimed. "You're 23 seconds late." Emma looked at her wrist. "I actually arrived 5 minutes early." Karen ignored the correction. "Never mind that. Come inside quickly. Some very important people are here." Emma stepped into the house, instantly surrounded by laughter, music, and the delicious smell of Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room looked more like a diplomatic summit than a family gathering. Human executives stood beside elegant alien ambassadors. Business owners exchanged holographic cards. Crystal chandeliers floated gently beneath the ceiling while robotic servers carried appetizers through the crowded room. Her father spotted her from across the room. "There she is!" Richard announced loudly. Several conversations stopped. Every head turned toward Emma. Richard smiled proudly. "This is our daughter." Emma waited. "The waitress." Several relatives chuckled. One cousin whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Still carrying trays?" Another added with a grin. "Guess somebody has to." More laughter. Emma smiled politely. "I actually enjoy my work." Richard laughed as though she made the funniest joke of the evening. "She says that every year?" Karen patted Emma's shoulder. "She's always been humble. No ambition," one uncle joked. "Very service-oriented." Another round of laughter rolled across the room. Emma simply picked up a glass of sparkling cider from a passing server. She had heard worse. Much worse. An elderly blue-skinned alien woman tilted her head thoughtfully. "In my culture," she said gently, Those who serve meals are considered guardians of peace. The room grew briefly quiet. Karen forced a smile. Oh, that's charming. Then she immediately changed the subject. So, has everyone seen our son's new penthouse on Mars? Emma couldn't help smiling to herself. Some things never changed. Her younger brother happily showed holograms of his luxury apartment, while everyone admired the expensive decor. No one asked Emma about her year. Not a single question. That was almost impressive. One of her aunts suddenly noticed the dessert boxes in Emma's hands. Oh, perfect! She handed them to Karen. Karen immediately looked at Emma. Would you mind arranging these in the kitchen? Emma nodded. Of course. And while you're there, Richard added casually, could you check whether the servers need help? Emma raised an eyebrow. You hired professional staff. You're practically one of them, her cousin muttered under his breath. Several relatives laughed again. Emma carried the desserts into the enormous kitchen. The hired catering staff greeted her warmly. Unlike her relatives, they recognized competence immediately. One young human chef smiled. You must be Emma. I am. I've heard amazing things about you. Before he could continue, another employee interrupted. The head chef needs help organizing the dessert presentation. Emma instinctively stepped in. Within minutes she rearranged the serving order, adjusted the lighting, repositioned decorations, and suggested a faster serving pattern so every table would receive desserts simultaneously. The staff exchanged impressed looks. That'll save us nearly 15 minutes, one cook admitted. How did you notice that so quickly? Emma shrugged with a smile. I've done this a few thousand times. As she returned toward the dining room, she overheard two alien guests speaking quietly. The human female carries herself like senior management. I noticed that too. Interesting. Emma pretended not to hear. Back in the living room, Karen was practically vibrating with excitement. She glanced repeatedly toward the front windows. Richard adjusted his tie for what felt like the 20th time. One wealthy businessman approached him. So, is it true? Richard grinned. If everything goes well tonight, we'll be making some extraordinary business connections. Another guest asked. Who exactly is coming? Richard lowered his voice dramatically. An investor whose family owns hospitality companies across multiple star systems. Gasps spread through the room. Even the alien guests looked impressed. Karen beamed proudly. If they like us, this could change everything. Emma quietly reached for another glass of cider. Her communicator vibrated once more. She glanced at the message. We're outside. She smiled despite herself. Across the room, Karen noticed. What are you smiling about? Emma calmly slipped the communicator away. Oh, just someone I care about. Karen barely listened. Her attention had already shifted toward the front entrance. Outside, brilliant white lights illuminated the driveway. A sleek black alien limousine descended silently from the evening sky. The massive front doors slowly began to open, and every conversation inside the house came to an abrupt stop. The massive front doors swung open with perfect timing, and every conversation in the room stopped as if someone had muted the entire house. A sleek black hover limousine rested silently outside, its polished surface reflecting the warm Thanksgiving lights. Two security officers stepped aside before a tall alien gentleman emerged. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his silver eyes glowing softly beneath neatly combed dark hair streaked with hints of blue. His tailored midnight suit carried no flashy logos, yet every person in the room recognized him immediately. Someone whispered, "That's Lord Varek." Another guest nearly dropped his drink. The Lord Varek? The investor who owns the Celestial Hospitality Alliance? I heard he purchased an entire moon just to build a resort. No, he bought 3. Richard straightened his jacket so quickly that one of the buttons flew across the room and landed in a bowl of mashed potatoes. Karen gasped. Oh my goodness! Richard, smile! Not that smile. The expensive smile! I only have one smile. Then use it better. Nearby relatives struggled not to laugh. Richard hurried toward the entrance with his arms stretched wide. Lord Varric! What an incredible honor! Welcome to our humble home. Lord Varric smiled politely and shook his hand. Thank you. Karen stepped beside her husband. We've been looking forward to this evening for weeks. Lord Varric nodded again. So have we. Before Richard could begin bragging about his investments, another figure stepped out of the limousine. He was younger, handsome, and carried himself with effortless confidence. His deep blue eyes scanned the crowded room only once before finding exactly who he had been looking for. His serious expression instantly became a warm smile. Without acknowledging anyone else, he walked straight past Richard. Past Karen. Past every wealthy guest trying to introduce themselves. He stopped in front of Emma. There you are. Emma smiled. You actually arrived only 6 minutes late. My father insisted. I told you. Cale laughed softly before wrapping her in a warm embrace. The entire room froze. Then, without hesitation, he kissed her. Several wine glasses nearly slipped from trembling hands. One elderly aunt let out such a dramatic gasp that a nearby robot server paused to ask if medical assistance was required. Richard blinked twice. Karen blinked 6 times. Emma smiled up at Cale. I miss you. I counted every hour. So dramatic. I learned from Dad. Lord Varric chuckled behind them. Karen finally managed to speak. Emma. Emma turned. Yes, Mom? Who exactly is this? Cale extended his hand politely. My name is Cale. Richard shook it automatically. Then Cale added with complete confidence. And I'm Emma's fiancé. Silence. Utter silence. Even the robotic server seemed confused enough to stop moving. Karen laughed nervously. Oh. She looked around for reassurance. What a funny joke. Cale looked genuinely puzzled. It wasn't a joke. Emma quietly held up her left hand. A beautiful engagement ring shimmered beneath the dining room lights. One cousin whispered. Since when was she engaged? Another replied. Apparently before dessert. Richard stared at the ring. You never told us. Emma smiled politely. You never asked? An awkward cough echoed through the room. Karen forced another laugh. Well, that's wonderful. Then she leaned closer and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. You know she's just a waitress, right? Cale smiled as though she just complimented Emma. I do. Karen waited. So, you're okay with that? Absolutely. Richard frowned. But she's only serving tables. Cale looked surprised. Only? He glanced toward Emma. The woman who can remember hundreds of guests by name? The woman who notices when a family needs a quieter table before they even ask? The woman who can calm an angry customer in less than 2 minutes? The woman who taught me that real leadership starts with serving others? Emma tried not to blush. Karen forced another uncomfortable smile. Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. Cale nodded. It's the correct way. Several alien guests exchanged approving looks. One elderly diplomat folded his arms. In our civilization, he said, future leaders spend 5 years working in public service before holding office. Another alien nodded. Our military officers must first cook meals for their own soldiers. A third smiled. Those unwilling to serve are never trusted to lead. Richard suddenly found the ceiling extremely interesting. Karen searched desperately for another topic. So, Cale. Yes? What exactly do you do? Emma covered her mouth, already knowing the answer was going to make this much worse. Cale answered casually. I help manage my father's companies. Richard brightened. Oh. Middle management? Cale smiled. Not exactly. Karen leaned forward. So, regional director? A little higher. Vice president? Higher. Executive? Higher. Richard laughed. What are you going to say next? That you own half the company? Cale shrugged. Technically 51%. The room exploded into whispers. Richard almost inhaled an olive. Karen slapped his back so hard that he accidentally sneezed cranberry sauce onto his own tie. Emma bit her lip to keep from laughing. One cousin quietly whispered, "I suddenly respect waitresses." Another replied, "I've respected them for almost 12 seconds now." Lord Varrock walked into the center of the room, clearly amused by everything he had witnessed. His silver eyes quietly observed each family member. He had noticed every joke, every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment Emma had smiled instead of arguing. He said nothing. Instead, he accepted a glass of sparkling cider from a passing server. He deliberately thanked the young employee by name after reading the tiny badge on his uniform. The server looked stunned. "You remembered my name?" Lord Varrock smiled. "Names matter." Emma watched him with quiet admiration. That single moment reminded her exactly why Cale respected his father so much. Karen hurried over carrying an expensive bottle of imported alien wine. "My husband and I would love to discuss a few investment opportunities after dinner." Lord Varrock accepted the glass but didn't answer. Richard quickly joined in. "We've prepared several business proposals." Lord Varrock simply smiled. "Interesting." His tone revealed absolutely nothing. He slowly looked around the room one final time before gently raising his glass. "If everyone would join me before we begin dinner," he said calmly, "I'd like to share a few words about why my family accepted this Thanksgiving invitation." The room instantly fell silent. Emma recognized the tiny smile on Cale's face. She knew that expression. It meant Lord Varrock was about to reveal something that would change the entire evening. The room became so quiet that the soft crackling of the fireplace suddenly sounded loud. Every guest slowly turned toward Lord Varrock as he stood with his glass raised. His calm expression carried the confidence of someone who had negotiated peace treaties between planets and closed business deals worth more than the economies of entire star systems. He smiled warmly. "Before we enjoy this wonderful Thanksgiving dinner, I'd like to share a story." Everyone listened. "My family has spent decades searching for people capable of leading our organization into the future." Several executives nodded eagerly. Richard puffed out his chest, convinced the speech was somehow leading toward him. Lord Varrock continued. "We interviewed politicians, military leaders, university scholars, famous entrepreneurs, and executives from more than 40 civilizations." Karen exchanged an excited glance with her husband. Richard whispered, "See? I told you tonight was important." His wife whispered back, "Stand straighter." Lord Varrock slowly walked around the room. "Most candidates had impressive resumes." He paused. "They also had impressive egos." A few guests laughed politely. "But we weren't searching for someone who could simply make money." His silver eyes settled on Emma. "We were searching for someone who could make people feel valued." Emma lowered her eyes, suddenly realizing where this speech was heading. Cale squeezed her hand reassuringly. Lord Varrock smiled. "About 3 years ago, I visited one of our struggling hotels disguised as an ordinary traveler." Several executives looked surprised. "Our customer satisfaction was collapsing. Employee morale was terrible. Managers blamed the staff. The staff blamed the customers. The customers blamed everyone." More quiet laughter spread through the room. "I expected another disappointing experience." He chuckled. "Instead, I met a young waitress." Karen smiled awkwardly. "Well, that's certainly fitting." Lord Varrock nodded. "Yes." She greeted every guest by name. If a child dropped dessert, she replaced it before the parents could even ask. When an elderly traveler looked tired, she quietly arranged a better room. When 2 alien families accidentally received the wrong cultural dishes, she solved the misunderstanding before it became an international incident. Several alien diplomats laughed knowingly. Lord Varrock continued. "I watched her for 3 days. She believed no one knew she was being observed." Emma covered her face with one hand. "Oh no," Cale whispered with a grin. "He's enjoying this. I can tell." Lord Varrock smiled. "At the end of my visit, I asked the hotel manager about her. The smile disappeared. He replied. Lord Varric dramatically cleared his throat. She's just a waitress. The words echoed through the silent dining room. Karen slowly looked down at her plate. Richard suddenly found his mashed potatoes fascinating. Lord Varric looked around the room. I've heard those exact words before. Then, with perfect timing, he looked directly at Emma's parents. Twice. No one laughed. The message landed exactly where it needed to. He continued gently. I have never understood the phrase just a waitress. A person who serves hundreds of strangers every day. A person who solves problems before anyone notices. A person who remembers birthdays, allergies, anniversaries, favorite meals, and frightened children. That isn't just anything. Applause erupted from several alien guests. Emma felt her cheeks growing warm. Lord Varric wasn't finished. I promoted her. Gasps filled the room. Within 6 months she transformed that hotel's performance. Customer satisfaction reached the highest level in our company's history. Another executive whispered. I remember those reports. Lord Varric nodded. We then placed her in charge of 3 hotels. They became our 3 highest performing locations. Then 12. Then 40. Eventually. He smiled proudly toward Emma. Our entire luxury hospitality division. Complete silence. Richard's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Karen nearly dropped the serving platter she was holding. One cousin whispered. Wait. Another finished the sentence. She wasn't serving tables anymore? A nearby aunt quietly replied. I don't think she's been serving tables for quite a while. Lord Varric continued. Today our hospitality network spans more than 60 planets. We employ over 200,000 people. And the woman responsible for building the culture behind that success. He raised his glass toward Emma. Is standing right here. Thunderous applause filled the room. Even the catering staff stopped working to clap. The young chef Emma had helped earlier smiled proudly. I knew it, he whispered. Karen forced an uneasy smile. Oh, yes. Our Emma has always been. She searched desperately for a suitable word. Hardworking. Emma simply smiled without saying anything. Lord Varric wasn't done. There's one final announcement. Cale laughed quietly. Here it comes. His father continued. After careful consideration by our board of directors. Several business guests leaned forward. I am officially naming Emma as the next Chief Executive Officer of Celestial Hospitality Alliance upon my retirement. Silence. Absolute silence. Then someone accidentally spit sparkling cider across the table. Richard's eyes became so wide they looked ready to escape his face. Karen grabbed his arm. You said she worked in restaurants. Richard whispered back. I thought she worked in restaurants. One elderly uncle muttered. I owe that waitress 20 credits. His wife sighed. You've owed her respect for years. The room exploded into excited conversation. Business executives hurried toward Emma. Congratulations! What an incredible achievement! We should schedule a meeting. One cousin who had mocked her less than an hour earlier suddenly smiled so hard his face looked painful. You know, I always believed in you. Emma tilted her head. Really? Absolutely. You once told everyone I peaked in high school. He laughed nervously. Did I? You printed it on a family reunion t-shirt. Oh. I may have been immature. Another relative stepped forward. My son is looking for work. A second interrupted. My daughter just graduated. A third appeared seemingly from nowhere. Any internships available? Emma looked at Cale. They're multiplying. Cale grinned. It's amazing what a CEO title does. Richard finally found his voice. My daughter. He smiled awkwardly. Our amazing daughter. Karen nodded so enthusiastically she nearly lost an earring. She's always been destined for greatness. Emma couldn't resist. Interesting. I thought I was just a waitress. Karen froze. Richard coughed so violently that he had to drink water. No one came to their rescue. Several alien guests quietly hid their laughter behind their glasses. Lord Varric watched the exchange with calm satisfaction before returning his attention to the room. There is only one reason Emma earned this position. He raised a single finger. Not because she is engaged to my son. He raised a second. Not because I like her. Then a third. She earned it because she proved, every single day, that the greatest leaders are the ones willing to serve others first. The room erupted into applause once again. Emma slowly stood from her chair. She smiled at Cale. Then she looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes that had once looked down on her. Finally, she took a slow breath. I think. She smiled gently. It's my turn to say a few words. Emma waited until the applause slowly faded. The room remained completely still, every guest curious to hear what the woman they had underestimated would say next. She looked around the table, smiling at familiar faces, uncomfortable faces, and embarrassed faces alike. Thank you, she began softly. Not for the applause. For listening. Her calm voice carried through the room without effort. I've been introduced in many different ways over the years. She smiled at one of the catering staff. Server. She looked toward another employee. Host. Then toward the chefs. Waitress. She nodded. And honestly. She laughed. I've never had a problem with any of those titles. Several people exchanged confused looks. Emma continued. When I was 19, I thought serving tables would just be a temporary job. But then I discovered something. She paused. People tell you everything over a meal. They celebrate birthdays. They cry after funerals. They propose. They argue. They make peace. They laugh. They create memories. She smiled warmly. I realized I wasn't just carrying plates. I was taking care of moments people would remember for the rest of their lives. Several alien guests nodded in agreement. Emma glanced toward Lord Varric. He was the first person who looked past my uniform. Lord Varric shook his head. No. I simply noticed what was already there. Emma smiled appreciatively. She then looked toward her parents. When I walked into this house today, I was introduced as the waitress. The silence returned. Karen slowly lowered her eyes. Richard looked as though he wished teleportation had been invented. Emma's smile never disappeared. You know something? I'm proud of that. That answer surprised everyone. If I had never worked as a waitress, I never would have learned patience. I never would have learned leadership. I never would have learned that the smallest acts of kindness often leave the biggest impressions. She laughed softly. I also learned that carrying 6 dinner plates at once is harder than managing a board meeting. Even Lord Varric laughed. The room relaxed. Emma continued. I've met billionaires who never thanked the people serving them. I've met janitors who treated every worker with respect. Guess which ones I remembered? Several executives quietly cleared their throats. Emma wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She was simply telling the truth. She looked back toward her parents. I spent years wishing you'd asked me about my work. What I was learning. What I was building. What made me happy. She shrugged gently. But every Thanksgiving. She smiled. You introduced me as the waitress. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Richard slowly stood. Emma. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. She looked at him quietly. I honestly believed your success would come from wearing expensive clothes. I thought titles made people important. He shook his head. I never realized you had already become the person I always hoped you'd be. Karen stepped beside him. We were so busy trying to impress strangers that we stopped seeing our own daughter. Emma could hear genuine regret in their voices. For the first time in years, they weren't performing for guests. They were simply being parents. She walked over and hugged them both. The room erupted into warm applause. One elderly aunt wiped away tears. Another whispered, Well, now I'm crying into the stuffing. Her husband replied, It adds flavor. Several guests laughed. The tension finally disappeared. Cale stepped beside Emma and gently took her hand. I was going to wait until after dessert. He smiled mischievously. But my father already ruined my surprise. Lord Varric raised an innocent hand. I regret nothing. The room burst into laughter. Cale reached into his pocket and produced a small crystal box. Inside rested a second ceremonial engagement ring crafted according to his people's traditions. He looked into Emma's eyes. In my culture, the first proposal is between two hearts. He knelt. The second is before the people whose blessing we hope to earn. He smiled. Emma, will you still choose this hopelessly dramatic alien every morning for the rest of our lives? Emma laughed through happy tears. I was hoping you would ask. Again. Yes. Absolutely yes. Cale slipped the ceremonial ring onto her finger. The guests cheered. Outside the enormous windows, colorful alien fireworks suddenly exploded across the night sky, painting the autumn clouds with brilliant shades of gold, blue, and violet. Richard looked outside in amazement. You plan fireworks? Lord Varric smiled. No, Cale answered proudly. I planned one firework. He pointed toward the sky. Hundreds more suddenly appeared. Lord Varric sighed. He doubled the budget. I tripled it. I noticed. Everyone laughed again. Music filled the house as dinner finally began. This time, however, everything felt different. The relatives who had mocked Emma earlier now treated every server with remarkable politeness. One cousin stood every time a waiter approached. Another thanked a robot server so many times that it politely asked him if it required technical assistance. The young chef from the kitchen approached Emma. Thank you for helping us earlier. Emma smiled. You already knew what to do. I only reminded you. Lord Varric overheard the conversation. He laughed. See? That's exactly why she's becoming CEO. Later that evening, Karen cautiously approached her daughter. So? Emma raised an eyebrow. So? Karen smiled awkwardly. I don't suppose your company is hiring? Emma pretended to think very seriously. She folded her arms. Well, there is one position available. Karen's face lit up. Really? Emma nodded. We're looking for someone who knows how to appreciate every employee equally. Karen laughed, realizing the gentle joke. I might need some training. Emma grinned. We all do. Richard raised his glass. To Emma. Not because she's a CEO. Not because she's marrying into wealth. But because she reminded us that no honest job deserves disrespect. Everyone lifted their glasses. Lord Varric added one final thought. The greatest civilizations are built by people who never believe they are above serving others. The guests drank together as laughter echoed through the house. Emma looked around the table one last time. Earlier that evening, she had entered as the waitress. She left as exactly the same person, kind, humble, and proud of where she had started. The only thing that had truly changed was how everyone else finally chose to see her. And somehow, that made Thanksgiving taste even better.